Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Welcome back from lunch or from wherever you're coming from right now. So I believe I'm supposed to introduce myself. So allow myself to introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Elledge, and I'll be your presenter for this afternoon. I'll be presenting a 3-hour workshop, which will be broken in half in the middle. And so I think there will be about a 15-minute break after we've spoken for 90 minutes, and then we'll come back here and speak again for 90 minutes if I haven't scared everyone away. So did anyone, I was here speaking yesterday about changing ACEs. Was anyone here for any of that discussion yesterday? Okay, so we've got all new folks today. All right, very good. Well, my name is Jeremy Elledge. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm a full-time therapist and mental health professional. I work for the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, ODMH SAS. And I'm a full-time, like I said, practicing clinician in outpatient services down south about half an hour in Norman, Oklahoma, the land of the Boomer Sooner. So, you guys have probably heard about us Boomer Sooners, and also up north is the land of the Cowboys, the Oklahoma State Cowboys. So anyway, I want to welcome you here from wherever you're here from. I'm not on the clock with the Department of Mental Health today, so I actually want to tell you just really briefly about the organizations that I'm representing today. I want to first thank the Evolution Foundation. As always, I'm proud to be a member of that coalition building organization, doing a lot of really amazing work here in Oklahoma and sponsoring us to be here with you guys today. So we thank Evolution Foundation, and I'm proud to be a part of those guys. If any of you guys know them, doing some great work. Chuck, Jeff, Teresa, Robert, and Alan, all the people that I may be forgetting. So appreciate being listed with those folks. And so I'm also the owner and founder of New View Healing Solutions. It's an organization that I started almost 5 years ago. And so we're official. We got shirts now, and so it makes me feel pretty fancy. And we have some business cards up here as well. And also, if you guys would like a copy of today's presentation, I've got a lot of slides that I'm gonna try to get through most of them, but I'm not necessarily trying to. We've got it figured at about 2 minutes and 45 seconds per slide or something. But I'd rather talk with you guys today. So if we don't get through every slide, that's not necessarily as important as us having some good discussion. So one of the things that I will tell you guys also, I am vision impaired. I've lost most of my vision over the past more than a decade now. I have a genetic condition called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. And so that's given me some unique experience, I guess you could say, and maybe some unique trauma as well, but we won't get into that. But so you know what I'm working with, I don't have any front vision, I have some peripheral vision. And I've undergone experimental treatment in different places in the world. As a child, I spent 10 weeks of my life in Moscow, Russia. To undergo painful and experimental treatment that didn't work, but it was a unique experience. So, and actually, they are curing some of these types of conditions now. Some of the forms of RP through gene therapy and stem cell. So one thing that it's important to know, I'd like to hear from you guys. If you want to have questions or comments, I want you to shout it out. And I'll pause at times and ask if there are questions or comments. Absolutely. Because I definitely want to hear from you guys, but if you raise your hand, I won't see it. I have nervous jokes also, so don't laugh. It only encourages me. But you guys are a beautiful audience, though. But if there is anything good about having a vision impaired presenter, is I'm not going to read you my PowerPoints. I'm going to talk to you guys today. And I want to, you know, share with you what I've gotten to learn. One thing, like I said, I'm not a professional talker. I do quite a bit of lecturing and training and speaking, but I'm a full-time therapist. I'm a doer of the work. And so I'm not going to just be a blowhard that, you know, talks about things that I don't practice or work with every day. So I think that that's of some value, I think, hopefully. And so, but I'll tell you about New View Healing Solutions really briefly, because I don't want to spend too much time. We've got a website, and you can check us out if you're interested. But we're an educational resource organization. I was part of one of the first trauma grants in Oklahoma quite a few years ago now, and I didn't write the grant, but I worked under it. And I helped implement some of the concepts and in becoming a trauma-informed organization at the hospital that I worked and with the partnering agencies in Oklahoma that were also implementing these new skills and new strategies. We had a child that was able to end their life, complete a suicide in our care at a children's hospital, and I won't say which children's hospital that was, but we were not a trauma-informed facility. And so being trauma-informed, I think we've probably heard the trendy language, trauma-informed. But the thing is, we want to make trauma training that's real, because I think there's a lot of training that's good out there, and some of it's just says the word enough times so we can check the box and, you know, meet the mandate so we can say we covered it. We got to keep it real, folks. And I'm here to keep it real with you today. I started, you know, because as a part of this grant, I would start to be invited to speak at different conferences like this, and it was always such an honor to come and try to sound smart for folks. But we measurably improved outcomes in the facilities where we trained. So this is about bottom line stuff. This is about people's lives being saved, and this is about treatment outcomes, and it's about people outcomes as far as the staff and the providers providing care. But I'm from a small town in the northeastern part of the state, Nowata, Oklahoma, and you've probably not heard of it. And so in Nowata, Oklahoma, it's a small town. We didn't have great training opportunities in Nowata, Oklahoma. We had to go to Tulsa or Oklahoma City or one of the universities. But the needs of our state are great. You know, Oklahoma, we're #1 in the nation for traumatizing children by many measures. And I'm born and raised Okie, and that's embarrassing. And see, the thing is, I don't preach to my fellow, mental health professionals, people like you guys, because you guys are a part of a fractional percentage of the population that comes and tries to learn ways to help people. Most everybody else is out there just doing their thing. This is your thing, and so I appreciate your thing. New View Healing Solutions is my thing, because we see so many problems in the world, and a lot of people are like, yeah, but what are you going to do? Well, we say something, and you guys said something. And I appreciate that a lot. I love being with my people. I'm so sick of talking to just cameras. We are recording this today. We will edit out any of your stuff if you talk or if you share or if you get in camera or whatever. Unless you have a special talent you want to show off, we will edit you out or whatever. But we may use this for training purposes, so we welcome you if you're watching in that way as well. But check us out. We've got tons of videos on our website, and they're free for anyone that doesn't need a CEU. And we provide low-cost continuing education for mental health professionals. We started it in rural communities, and we would just call up everybody in the area and say, we're doing this thing. If you plan it, will they come? And so it's really taken off over 5 years, and folks that support our continuing education get really low-cost CEUs and discounts for seniors, veterans, and state employees, but it makes it free to the larger community. We don't do it to really generate our main income or anything like that. At our last event, I gave everything we made to the people that supported it, like people like Travis, and so I've got a full-time job, so New View is not my gig. So one of the things I am really proud of, though, if you are in Oklahoma, and I want you guys to know this, we do free training for every single police department and every single school district in the state of Oklahoma. We don't ask $1 from our systems of care that need care. We're here to make a difference, not $1. And so if you know people that need to hear what we're talking about, then let them know. And our next big event is coming up on December the 2nd in Broken Arrow. We're going to be doing Changing Aces Where You Are. It's 4 hours. It's CLEAT approved. It's mental health approved. And later on that afternoon, we're going to be doing Hurts for Your Hurts, more music and movement for healing. And I'm going to have everybody up getting down. So it's a lot of fun, and it's about neurosequential science for helping us heal our mind and our body, and remembering ways to kind of, I don't know, get back to being a human. So I think we're getting further and further away from what it means to be a person, and then we feel bad and wonder why. So anyway, check us out, and if you'd like a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation, send us an email at newviewhealingsolutions.org. It sounds like we've got a great group from all over, and it is just an honor to get to offer some representation of what we're trying to do and learn here in Oklahoma. So I hope you guys are having a great conference, and we're going to jump right in and get started. And so what's the first slide?
No one ever said it would be easy to change the world.
Yeah, okay. So Travis is my eyes today, so he's going to help me stay centered. Okay, so truth should not be controversial, folks, but it is, I guess, these days. So we're going to talk about some tough stuff. You know, I mentor people sometimes, talk with young social workers, and you know, we get into this work because we want to change the world, right? We want to make a difference. And nobody ever said it was going to be easy, and nobody ever said it was going to always feel good. You know, and so I feel like in many ways our world is moving backwards. I work with lots of kids. They think the world's going to be ending soon. Lots of them do. That's a prevalent thought among the youth of today. We got to show them that there is a reason to plan for tomorrow. But we've got our work cut out for us. So anyway, it takes knowledge. Knowledge is power, and so I hope to share some of mine with you today. So what's the next slide? The first real slide, Travis. Okay, so some interesting history. Do you guys know how we prosecuted the first case of child abuse in the United States of America? Anyone know?
No.
Okay.
Was it through the animals?
Yes, it was animal protection. You are correct. Through animal protection, we actually protected livestock or pets before we protected the small and developing human being child. And so it was first believed that war veterans were the ones that had trauma. Now we knew that trauma, that's a traumatic experience to have to go to war, and we appreciate the men and women who serve. But we know battle is hard and traumatic. But so they didn't really understand trauma. One of the most prevalent symptoms for the war veteran was being the exaggerated startle response. Being real jumpy. And so I guess trauma means loud noises. And so it wasn't until other populations started to demonstrate trauma that we started to actually understand trauma. And so you guys have heard of the rule of thumb? Okay, what's that mean? You're correct. It's such a harmless phrase that people have tossed around for years. I didn't know that's what it meant. Yeah, the rule of thumb, I thought it was an eyeball measure, just a kind of unofficial rule. And that's what it is, an unofficial rule, because it was not a law, but it was a legal precedent that a judge said, now guys, we're not saying you can't beat your wives and children, but we're saying that you can't beat them with anything wider than your thumb. So you had to hope your guy had skinny fingers. And make no mistake about it, some of those precedents early on, it wasn't necessarily about humane concern for women or children. Women were very much depended upon to help, maintain the house, keep the kids, support the husband in his tasks and role. And so it was an inconvenience for society for women to be dead or incapacitated. Inconvenience. And it wasn't until other populations started to have trauma, because very oftentimes if a woman went to the local county sheriff and said, I'm being harmed in my home, help me please, you were very often sent back to your abuser by an annoyed person who didn't want to get involved. That's family stuff, family business. You imagine what your woman's down here telling us? You better get things under control. And so again, but once they started to protect women and children a little bit, because again, there was a case of abuse so heinous to a child, somebody happened upon it and said, you can't do that, we're calling the law. Law comes out and says, well, there's nothing on the books that says they can't, but we agree this isn't right. So they prosecuted under animal protection law, and then they started to change some laws and started to protect women and children a little bit better. And then we certainly see that America has been founded on marginalization. And so, now one of the things, I'm a straight white man, and so at times I'm wondering if this is okay for me to talk about.
Talk about it.
I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it because I'll tell you, see, some people only listen, some of the good old boys only listen to a white boy like me. And so I'm going to use my voice. So anyway, show me the next slide. Injuries we could talk about. You know, why was war something that we could, because we would acknowledge the trauma of the soldier. We wouldn't acknowledge the trauma of the indigenous. We wouldn't acknowledge the trauma of the African American or the Mexican. We wouldn't acknowledge the trauma of the woman or the child in the home. Now, we knew trauma is out there in them streets. It's down the road. It's in the battlefield. It's over in Ukraine. But it does a special kind of harm when we're harmed in our safe place, when we're supposed to be safe in our home. You see, we have a very unconscious response to pain. You know, when you accidentally touch something hot, you don't think, gosh, I am injuring myself, I better knock that off. No, at thousands of miles per second, a signal goes through your nervous system, your brain, to indicate that potential injury. Ow! We don't do that. But a lot of people, women and children or marginalized populations, are left with their hand on the burner. And so, again, trauma is an injury. We're going to talk about that. But injured people do injured things, and we are becoming an increasingly injured society. And so anyway, well, there's this term called critical race theory. It's a boogeyman. You can say it like that. Well, I wish they would quit calling it a theory, because it's not a theory. Now, one of the things, I'm proud to be an American, but I also want to own the reality of America. Human history is wrought with brutality and racism, and America was part of that. And to fail to acknowledge that is to contribute to that. And so one of the things that we have to recognize is, well, the North American continent was stolen. It was stolen from the indigenous American first. And did you guys know that they used Bible verses? Yes. They used a good book to justify a terrible act. And so what they did was, you remember one of the scriptures? I can tell you one, because man, which means white man, it looks like us, was given domain over what? The fowl of the air, the fish of the sea, and the beast of the field. And those people over there that don't look like us, that have feathers in their hair and wear different clothing and have different cultural practices, we could dehumanize them and so justify their slaughter and their theft and their relocation into smaller and smaller and less abundant places to be. And so the very same Bible verse was quoted to justify the ownership of African people. And so now one of the things that we have to acknowledge, some people get their feelings hurt pretty bad when we start talking about what really happened in the world. But we didn't do that. We didn't do that. Some of our ancestors did that to some of our other ancestors, and it's not wrong to acknowledge that. It's not going to have the children fighting with each other in the schoolyard to own the truth. But you know, I live in a southern state. Some of y'all do too. And so people want to fly that rebel flag, you know. No, that just means the Southern way of life, you know. Well, there was a whole bunch of states and groups of people who wanted to start their own country for the Southern way of life, which was predicated on human ownership. That's one of the things that I really want to, you know, kind of help the police think about, is because the police aren't naturally bad. We have to have police to help maintain order, but they've always helped to maintain the law of the land. But one of those laws used to be human ownership and captivity, and policemen used to help maintain human captivity. And so culture happens like this. We learn from someone who learned from someone who learned from someone who learned from someone, and we don't always apply logic. We do what's familiar. And so anyway, I want us to kind of be real. I've made people mad before. People have gotten huffy and stormed up out of my training before, and I feel for them and their sensitive feelings. But I'm not meaning to offend anyone today. I certainly don't want to do that. But the truth is the truth, whether we speak it or not. But anyway, a significant part of Mexico, and it became Texas, annexing. That's a very official sounding word, isn't it? Who else is trying to annex their neighbors these days? You all heard of anyone trying to annex anybody? Russia. Yeah, Russia's trying to annex parts of their peaceful neighbor Ukraine. Yeah. Annex. That's a weird word. And so, and one of the things is, I feel like, well, I'm going to be opinionated for just a second. Is that all right? I feel like if you believe in God, then God gives us a planet and it's spinning around through space, and it's pretty weird that human beings, these ants, want to put up lines and say, this is our part of the rock, and you don't get to come onto this part of the rock. That's a weird thing to me. But anyway, but I feel like a lot of Americans want things to just be easy, and they don't really want to compete with somebody who's willing to walk across a desert to make something better for their family, you know. And so anyway, what's next, Travis?
Manifest destiny, violent theft, manifest destiny.
Yeah. So we like to call our society civilized, but some things have really changed to become more civil. But manifest destiny, you know, I put on there how Webster defines that. There's usually some kind of incentive. You know, we started doing that, they coined the term in America in 1845. In 1845, we used once again, divinity. God said we were supposed to take this from you. And so, but really, the reality has been and remains, if there's enough of you and if you're strong enough to take it and keep it, it's yours. You know, so that's America today, you know, and so I would say it's an American experiment that we're all here together. The different populations that come here together, but yeah. So might means right. It has often been the trend, and so what do we do about that? I mean, because again, we want to be a civilized society that's equal and that cares about everybody. We're clearly not. Liberty and justice for all has eluded us and is aspirational at best. Well, one of the things that we do, I won't get into your politics. I'm so sick of politics, so don't worry. We won't go there today. You're in a safe, politic-free zone. But I will say this: we got to vote for people that vote for families and kids, that vote for equality for us all. We've got to, you know, because we're getting what we pay for. You know, in Oklahoma, we're 46th in the nation for educational spending, and we're 46th in the nation for mental health spending, and some of that's getting a little bit better. We got a few more dollars coming into our state, but I'll tell you this, You know, we're getting all these injured outcomes. #1 in the nation for ACEs, you know, and all the injured people doing injured things to show for it. And that's why it's so important that we trauma inform our systems too, because with more dollars coming in, we can build some nice, pretty new buildings. And if we keep doing the same old crap inside those buildings, nothing's going to change. So anyway, show you a kind of a graphical representation there of how these imaginary lines keep changing. You know, and so no telling. I wonder what they'll look like in another 50 or 100 years. Canada may want to build the wall against us. So a few of us are ready to jump north.
It's true.
You know. So. Okay. So again, like I said, we're going to talk about racism. And so, well, it's rooted in something called tribalism. Now, in ancient times, racism made a lot more sense. To be afraid of somebody that was different than you, you see a group of people coming your way that's different than you, trouble is likely to be coming. Because again, our nature as a violent species is uh-oh, they're coming to take our stuff, our resources, our space, our hunting ground. So a fear of difference made sense once upon a time, because in pretty much similarity was collected in each continent. We were in places where we were like those around us, and then we started to move around. Racism, okay. I lose my train of thought sometimes. I do this all from memory, so you just have to bear with it. It sometimes makes for a great presentation, and it sometimes puts a foot right in the mouth there. Anyway, but there's been some bad characters throughout history that have taken advantage of that fear of difference. Because to be uncertain about somebody who's different than you is, I think, in some ways natural. But to give into that and to allow it to give into hate or whatever. You know, look at your Hitlers. You know, Hitler dehumanized the Jewish people. And you know, made them lesser, and convinced the society that these were bad, and you know, again, out of sight, out of mind. You know, we're just taking them somewhere else. Don't worry about where they're going, and never mind that white stuff pouring out of the sky. So again, racism is such a manipulative plot. You know, thinking back to our Civil War history. It was a propaganda. It was a trick played on the poor Southern boys in many ways, because the poor Southern boys that fought for the Confederate cause usually didn't own slaves. They were convinced that this cause was just by rich boys with soft hands. And so again, but they had to dehumanize the African first. They had to cause us to be afraid. They're going to come get your women. You know, that's how they, you know, justified going after the young man and then burning half of Tulsa down. And so now one of the things that I think we have to be aware of is that we might have reactions that we're not conscious of. We have to look for what we're not aware of. We don't know what we don't know. I was listening to a speaker a couple of years ago at the Children's Behavioral Health Conference. He was speaking about equality and advocacy and you know, on behalf of good things. He was a white boy too. And he made a confession. He made a confession. He was flying someplace, and he noticed that the plane that he was on was boarded by 2 black pilots. And he thought to himself, what? Is this okay? Can black people fly planes? And then he caught himself. He said, oh my God, I'm flying to go and speak about racial equality, and I'm catching myself. So people need to be honest if they catch themselves thinking one of them thoughts, and be willing to explore and flush out. I think everybody's probably a little bit racist. We've all been affected by it in some ways, and if we're not willing to search for any racist influences, you know, Joe Biden, he's like buddies with Barack Obama. Y'all heard what he said about how eloquent and well-spoken he is. You almost said for a black guy. But that's what he was kind of suggesting. He wasn't trying to insult his buddy. He was blind to what he wasn't aware of. Europeans and Africans and Latino and Asian, these would not all coexist naturally together, but there's no reason why we can't. Because when we get to know somebody, we realize that a lot of those preconceived notions are just that. That's the propaganda that has been sold to us all. There's some people that don't like it when we play nice together, when we're friends, when we're brothers and sisters. And so again, there are some indicators though. Most not racist, but is the next slide.
Yep.
Most not racist, but because nobody wants to wear the term, I guess, except Kanye West. I don't know what's going on with that brother these days. He needs to get back on his meds. He's a very special individual. But again, nobody wants to own being a racist. In fact, you'll hear people say, "I ain't no racist. I just don't see why those people ... Whoever those people are, and whatever their nonsense they're about to spill out of their mouth." And so the thing is, all humans are fallible, but when we start attributing human fallibility to race or group membership, that might be an indicator. If somebody who doesn't look like you cuts you off in traffic, and instead of calling them just a jerk or an a-hole, you call them a racially specific jerk or a-hole, then again, we have to be willing to look at what doesn't affect us. And one of the things too is this isn't just about race, this is also about gender, because you ladies, y'all are by nature, by very existence, more endangered than me. And so there are so many people right now that are just, it ain't a problem for me, so what's the problem? I was at a training once, co-ed audience, and it was about sexual assault. I was not the presenter, so of course I was in the front row having a hard time shutting up. But as far as the lady was talking about what people do to guard themselves against sexual victimization. And so she asked the audience, what do you guys do to be safe against being raped or kidnapped? And and people had all kinds of things, I remember one of them said they carry their keys like this. That's what my mom did. She was going to stab them with them keys, And others said they carry mace or pepper spray, a knife or a gun. I think one lady had a bazooka in her trunk. But they walk out in groups. They park under lights. They only go out at certain times. And one of the things that I think that we do without, say, could we say that a different way? It hurts me to hear it that way, because, and see, part of it is saying bad things about members of either race is teaching you to, some inner turmoil for sure.
Right.
And so it's never wrong to tell somebody how what they're doing makes you feel. And one of the things, I've worked with people over some years and some racist little boys that are now fairly liberal young men because they were polluted. Their brains were polluted. And instead of saying, you're wrong, and I'm like, because boy, they ruffle my feathers sometimes with some of the garbage that comes out of their mouth. But sometimes, instead of telling people they're wrong, you ask leading questions and help their brain arrive at the answer. Help them discover, and like, holy cow, make them say it.
Let them think.
Yeah. So great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Or it's absolutely generational trauma because it does create irrational fear and kind of magical thinking. You know, I knew a guy that literally was afraid of every single dog. I mean, even the pet therapy dog Lassie that came in, and I mean, this guy was a huge, strong dude. A big, strong man, 300 plus pounds, and he would knock tables over to get away from a very small dog. And I mean, so again, injuries are not rational. But again, you had brilliant words. Thank you so much for responding to, because one person's respect should not come at the expense of another's. And I think I love it. One of the things that I do want to talk about, and this is really going to hurt some of my white brothers and sisters a little bit in their feelings, but I've heard white people say, well, Native Americans, black people, they don't like us either. They don't like us. There's a difference. There's hypervigilance. One of the symptoms of trauma is hypervigilance, and we notice particular hypervigilance among certain populations because of their very existence being less safe. And so back to, I was talking to you guys about the ladies that were talking about how they keep themselves safe. There were men in the audience too, and the speaker, she noticed and said, hey, I noticed no guys are answering the question. Well, you, sir, in the front row, what do you do to keep yourself from being kidnapped and raped and murdered? He said, nothing. I never really thought about it.
Right.
What a separate and unequal reality. And so the thing is, so many people, not my problem, so what's the problem? And so we've got to be willing to help people consider the experience outside of their own. Because again, attributing fallibility to to a racial group or membership, that's an indicator of a problematic pattern. Being more accepting of the same fallibility within your own group. Seeing your brother-in-law do the same thing and be cool with it. So again, these are some indicators that we can help people watch for. Some people say that they ain't a racist. All right, so here's some indicators. Check them boxes. And if you're truly interested in becoming a better person and growing as a human being, as we all should hope to do, then here are some ways that you could maybe think about doing that. The card-carrying, cross-burning people, those are lost. Those are lost evil people, I guess. But there's people who wish to be good but don't realize how they're, accidentally hurting people that they care about. Just like Joey B. and Barack, So I'm from the Tulsa area. And so it's kind of near and dear to my heart. I have Tulsa tattooed right on my chest right here. I did that right before I moved away from home. And so I like tattoos. But I graduated from a suburb of Tulsa in 1997. The Tulsa Race Massacre happened in 1921. And they never taught us about it. In fact, it wasn't even investigated as a crime until 1997. That's weird. Wonder why they would do that. And so, but the thing was, it wasn't like, one person goes missing, it's kind of a missing persons thing, we don't know what, maybe they ran away or something. 300 people or so were gone, murdered, and that was not investigated. And so, they used to call this the race riot. I'd heard of it referred to as a race riot. Oh, okay, black people were mad about something, race riot. But when we break down the actual facts of the event, of course, I guess, some of you guys know, some of you perhaps don't. A young man was riding an elevator in a city building in Tulsa. I don't remember how many floors. I think he was just going up 1 or 2 floors. So he was accused by the white girl running the elevator of doing a sexual harassment or offense or abuse or molestation of some sort. And he was arrested because that was one of the things that really outrages people. You know, they always said, they told the Southern boys in the Army, they're going to rape your women. You know, that's one of the things they're going to make you real scared of. You know, and so he was arrested and charged. And the crowd came to lynch him. The African American community, believing him to be innocent, came to his aid and at least wanted him to have a trial rather than a lynching. The city of Tulsa issued firearms and munitions to the crowd of white people, who of course then were able to push the black crowd back. But they didn't just push them back. They killed them, they shot them, they burned them down. 1,256 structures, homes, schools, churches, and businesses were burned down. And this was, I'm from Tulsa. North Tulsa is a rough area to this day, but it didn't used to be. Generational trauma inflicted. You know, this was known as Black Wall Street. This was one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest, black community in America. Burned to the ground, wealth stolen. City of Tulsa preventing rebuilding, preventing investigations. For 300 or more lives lost, and all of that wealth not passed on to the next generation. And so the thing is, I again, graduated in 1997. They didn't even start investigating these crimes. 1921 to 1997, is that 76 years? Is my math correct? So I guess they wanted to wait till all the murdering grandpas. I mean, but the thing is, racism, it's so disgusting and sick. And I mean, I know we're all in the same choir singing here about this, but there are some people that, I mean, will go to church and hear about God and then believe that other people that were made by God don't have any business even existing. They wanted to just wipe them out of existence. And those people had children, and their children had children, and their children have children, and some of them are running them up today. But we got to stand up, because I believe they are a loud minority. They're loud and obnoxious and ridiculous, but they are a minority, and they're scaring the public. They're scaring people, but we can't let that happen. We the people. You know, this is your country. This is my country too. You know, and anyway, I start these presentations kind of monotone, trying not to get too passionate. By the end, I'm like a Baptist minister. I need to wipe my forehead, you know. But where are we at, Travis? Okay, so I feel like mentally ill populations are also a bit marginalized. You know, those crazy people, you know. Before I was a mental health professional, I didn't realize what mental illness really was. When I was outside of this field, well, when you think about mental illness, what do you think about? You think about probably the most severe cases. Yeah, schizophrenia. You think about institutionalization, padded rooms, and, you know, sedation, and, you know, really severe tragic disorders that we don't make light of. But I didn't realize that normal people were diagnosable too. Whatever normal means. Whatever normal is. You ask 100 different people what normal is, you would get some wild answers. So as far as what normal is, you know, you get a lot of different ideas on that. So anyway, we're operating from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. As a mental health professional, I got the big book of words to say what's wrong with you. And we're on the 6th edition. It just came out fairly recently. And so there were 5 previous editions where I guess we didn't have it right. We got it right now, though. So till the next one. So see, the thing is, human problems aren't changing that much, but our understanding of them, our words keep changing. And so, but one of the things is, I think as we look back into the history of treatment, we may look at what we're doing right now in 50 years and say, my God, what were we thinking? You know, they used to have something called phrenology. You know what that is? They feel the bumps on your head. They feel the bumps on your cranium. Now, the gentleman who founded this practice, He had great success in telling things about the personalities of his friends and family that he felt their heads. Now again, he was pretty familiar with these people. So it was pretty ridiculous when he got outside of his familiarity there, except for people like the Nazis used such practices to justify harm. You guys know where hysteria, the term hysteria, comes from? From Papa Sigmund. What does it mean? The root word of or hysteria is hyster, and it refers to the female anatomy. And so, old Sigmund Freud, who many had believed was the father of modern psychology, said you ladies were crazy because of your lady parts.
Yep, sure did.
And so now the reality is, now we know that the term hysterical, that's a term that is a legitimate term, but we know that males or females can be hysterical based on being in crisis, being unsafe, being injured. But again, women in society were frequently injured and oppressed with less rights, and so, but there, hysteria was a term to dismiss these, women. What are they, crazy women? They're just, And again, this is old Sigmund Freud. He also prescribed cocaine and did quite a bit of it himself. It was par for the course. There was, we've talked about, and I can't go into all the history of mental health treatment, but we used to lock everybody up, and then we let everybody go. And both extremes have been absolutely, well, one was locking a lot of people up and restricting people's freedoms in ways that were unnecessary, and then it put people into society that weren't able to function safely, and then let them start making babies. And anyway, so there was that. You guys heard about rebirthing? No. Yeah. And so as late as I believe 1990s, they would physically reenact in some instances the process of birth till they killed a little girl on camera. They filmed themselves doing it, so they thought they were doing a good thing. They were clinical professionals. They got to do some prison time for it. They constructed out of pillows and bean bags and cloth and stuff, and they put a child into a makeshift womb, and they squeezed her. They sat on her and tried to squeeze her out, and they suffocated her to death on camera in the name of treatment. And so, yeah, I didn't mean to traumatize you. I know. I'm a trauma specialist, and that's what I do. Yeah, okay, all right. But again, what was the last thing on there? What was before that? Oh yeah, false memories, implanted memories, and hypnosis. That was a real big trend for a long time, for a little while anyway. People were being convinced of certain abuses that had not taken place. Families were being torn apart. People were killing themselves. So we really, for my fellow mental health professionals, we really have to be evidence-based. Because a lot of people, we get a few letters behind our name, we get to feeling pretty fancy. I'm a certified advice giver. I close that office door, nobody knows what I'm in here saying with them people. And that can be really dangerous and harmful in some instances that I'm actually going to share with you guys about. You guys you're okay with me so far, it seems like, except maybe I may have lost one person back there, but okay. One of the trainings that I do a 3-hour workshop called Treating Ultimate Avoidance. Ethical considerations, once again, for treating addiction and suicide. Addiction and suicide and different non-binary gender or orientations have been classically judged, vilified, and so these were things that, well, we couldn't talk about it. You know, and so the thing, we had very little data on suicidality. We had very little data on addiction, and we had very little data on non-binary gender or orientation. And why do you guys think that is? Why didn't we get to have much science about this stuff back in the day? Well, if you admitted that you were suicidal, you were locked up. And if you committed suicide, the Christian church took your belongings. You were not allowed to leave your estate to your family if you committed suicide. You were basically your tomb or whatever was vandalized and all these things. But once again, there was a monetary and a financial incentive for painting this as a sin. And this is where I lose a few people. This is where I lose a few people because talking about suicide, whether it is or it isn't a sin. I'm not God, I don't know. So I'll leave that to more qualified entities. But it wasn't until the 5th century the Christian church started to soften some of their views, and so people would actually acknowledge when they were struggling with certain things. But of course, addiction has often been viewed as a weakness, a character flaw. And one of the things that we know now about understanding trauma and understanding the way that pain works, people don't think about the best and most rational and healthy way to get out of pain when they're in immense pain. They just want out. They just need an escape. And so again, we don't know about those hands or bodies or lives that have been left on the burner. So as we started to come to understand human problems, human emotions, human brains and bodies better, then we have a more compassionate response sometimes. And we're better able to support. And that's why they started to change things in our DSM, in our Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Again, in early society, two of the most influential people were the preacher and the doctor. And the preacher man said it's a sin, and the doctor man said it was a comorbidity, an illness. It was wrong if you were gay or lesbian. And so if that was a choice to make, then people wanted to choose not to be that, but we found out it wasn't a choice. Some people are very offended by that statement. I'm sorry for you. I have a really close friend and a member of this organization. And he's a gay man, and he tried to be a straight man. He couldn't be one. He couldn't have played a straight person on TV. And he's one of my bestest friends. And so anyway, what's the next slide? So tell you guys a little bit about the history. Back in 1969, there was a gay club at Stonewall, and it was started by, I believe, the Genovese crime family. But this was it gave the gay and lesbian a place to have some community. But it wasn't necessarily a safe place. I mean, they had strength in numbers, but they were regularly shaken down, arrested. But there was a lot of corruption in the police at that time. So a lot of times they weren't there to be fined or arrested for their sins. They were there to get their money. Until one day, they had enough. They said, "You want our money? Fine." And they started pelting them with their money. Coins, and then silverware, and then bottles, and then chairs. And it was a riot that lasted for 2 days. And I can think of nothing more American than people being oppressed and restricted and being told you're not okay and you're not good, and fighting for their freedom. My gay brothers and sisters, that's a real proud moment in their history. Because they were going to stand up and say no, not anymore. And so we started. That's why in June we celebrate, Pride Month. So I think of a lot of our most basic learning our most fundamental tenets in our brain are coming in a time that I would term pre-logic. We do a lot based on what's familiar, not necessarily what makes sense. Now, I wish that they started talking about it in pre-K and elementary school and middle school and high school and everything like that to help counterbalance whatever we may be learning in our homes. But we get our ideas on the way men and women are supposed to treat each other, how children are supposed to be treated, how different people than us, different groups are supposed to be treated in those early foundational years of life. Again, that's pre-logic. I teach a lot about something called emotional intelligence. And certainly we've got to guard the familiarities of our children. Our young brains are just sucking up data. And we don't have a goalkeeper that's kicking out the dysfunctional data. It's letting in all data. And then later on when kids are, have time, it's time for them to express their feelings and thoughts and views. They reach into the cognitive cookie jar and this is the data they got to pull out. But the great thing is, we have much capacity. There's approximately 16 billion neurons in your cerebral cortex. There's room in there for new data. And so we can't help the data that was put in our young brain. We can't help it. So if we were taught by racist people, not our fault. If you grew up around, dysfunctional norms, not your fault. It does make your job a little harder to challenge what you may not see within yourself. So again, lost my train of thought there.
Pre-logic learning.
Yeah, it's pre-logic learning. But so yeah, we have to be willing to look at. Later on, I'm going to talk to you guys about something called Identify, Challenge, and Change. I'm writing a book. It's called ACEs, Injuries, and Healing. And so we can change our brain. We have the power. We didn't get to start our brain, but we get to finish it. I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. Write that down. But we get to choose how our brain continues to grow and develop. We put data into our brain, and we can focus and consciously choose to access that new data in our interactions and skills over and over and over again, and we can forge new development in our brain, and we can do that at 7 or 70. And so I'm real excited because I had dysfunctional teachers. I didn't have all good teachers. I had some good ones. It wouldn't have been better if we'd all just been raised by Mr. Rogers, but I don't know. Again, we get to influence the ongoing development of our brain based on what we do. And so, but we have to be willing to challenge pre-logic learning. And again, pre-logic learning, we're not always aware of what our norms have been. And so, what's next?
Defining trauma.
Okay, well this is the stuff I'm good at talking now. So I was really stumbling through that other stuff, but now I'm, trauma is an injury. And we know what trauma is, kinda. It's often been something that it's difficult to always put into the best words, but we know what it is. And one of the reasons I think everybody understands when I'm talking about trauma is because we get it because we got it. If anybody in here has got no trauma, I'm making my way around to get a high five from you. In fact, we don't hate you for being safe. We just want to know how you did it. How can we replicate that for the rest of humanity? Now, trauma is a noticeable event typically. Unless it was early and often. And so now chronic stress is a little bit different. Chronic stress is sometimes a little bit less noticeable, but it has a very similar impact on our brain and on our body. And so chronic stress is having something to worry about all the time. You ever notice when you're really stressed out or tense, your shoulders do this? And then you realize you're doing it, and you're like, relax. You got to let yourself relax. You let your shoulders down, and before you know it, you're like this again. Chronic stress. And so, and being members of certain groups in the United States of America is a stressful situation. And I say that because of the empathy that I have for my brothers and sisters, not because I know firsthand. I don't know what it's like. You know, in therapy, I think the old school therapy class, they taught you to scratch your chin and nod and say, I understand. We don't understand. We don't. And so, what slide is this again?
Defining trauma.
Defining trauma. I forgot about the defining trauma slide. Brain getting tired. So, but one of the things, again, post-traumatic stress is what we would typically diagnose somebody if they met criteria for certain symptoms. Complex PTSD is when there's layers upon layers upon layers of trauma. And so again, if the dog bit you and then you're scared of the dog or dogs in general, you know where that comes from. But if there were layers upon layers upon layers of trauma, it's not always so easy to connect the dots for a cognitive behavioral therapy session. And so, so again, well, they say, well, let me tell you guys about this kid. I was telling folks about him yesterday. He told me, well, he asked me why I was there to see him. And I said, I'm here to do your trauma assessment. Trauma, what's that? And I did my best job to define it for him. And he said, well, I don't have any of that, and I ain't talking to you about it. I said, all right, well, let's just play pool or something. Let's hang out for a little while. I got some time with you, and let's just play some pool. He said, am I going to get in trouble? Am I getting a refuse? I said, no, man. You know, I said something I often say. I said, I'm not a dentist, and I don't pull teeth. If you don't want to tell me, I don't want to know. So he told me everything. And he had a very traumatic childhood, and it was layer upon layer from the earliest memories. And it was, and again, when the traumatic thing happened to us, it's when everything changed, but it was never a big change. It was always just a state of influx and chaos. And so it had become a very normalized injury. Now, one thing that it is believed that it's really impossible to fully recover from post-traumatic stress or trauma-related disorders until you're safe. So a lot of people are really lacking the opportunities to do much more than survive, not doing the thriving and really achieving, you know, all that they could because of the lack of safety and what that does to our nerves. When we have a more active nervous system, limbic system, we have less access to our cerebral cortex. That's our smart brain. Stressed people can't think. So anyway, it's really important for us to understand that trauma is an actual injury. Go to the next slide, please. When I was a kid, before I lost vision and stuff, I rode a motorcycle. And I tell this story a lot. I got hit by a truck on my motorcycle in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, crossing Elm Street. I was a very inexperienced little rider, and I got splattered all over that road. And I was very lucky to have survived. I was very badly injured. I had bones poking out of my body. And so you're not supposed to see those. So anyway, I was very badly injured, and it was apparent that I was injured. And people cut me some slack when I was injured with them, because the doctors even told my family, he might be hard to live with for a little while, but cut him some slack. He's hurting bad, can't move. And I did. I think I was moody and irritable and emotional with my family, lashed out perhaps a little bit. They cut me some slack for the most part because I was so badly injured, and it was apparent. Now, trauma changes our brain and our heart and our nervous system in measurable ways. And people don't walk around with brain scanners and heart monitors on. It changes, you know, our sleep patterns. It changes our physical growth and development. It changes the way kids hit puberty. So the thing is, people have often treated trauma like this emotional thing you talk about with the therapist types, but something that, an emotional experience that alters your physiology, alters your neurological development, that's a physical injury. And injured people do injured things. And so it's really, really important for us to understand the injuries of trauma so we know what to do with it. Because, you know, by the way, this is good for ethics, and I forgot, I'm supposed to say ethics every 12 minutes for it to count. But again, injured people can challenge our ethics sometimes. Our values are to be there for all kids, but some of them yell at us and say mean things. You know, there was a kid at our children's hospital. I was a direct care staff when I was in school, and I was shadowing the veteran staff to learn how to be my own staff one day. And a little girl that had been brought into the facility had tried to kill herself the day before. She'd overdosed. And so they detoxed her at the regular hospital. Then they brought her to us in handcuffs and shackles, like you do a hurt baby. And so she slept and she slept and she slept. And my teacher staff said, let's go wake her up and get her some breakfast. And I'm like, oh boy, I get to finally help a kid. It was one of my very first interactions. One of my very first interactions. And so the little girl didn't want to wake up. She said, leave me alone, I'm sleepy, I don't feel good, I don't want it. And the lady that was teaching me was more and more insistent. Well, honey, you need to get up. It'd be better for you if you did. And all of a sudden the little girl cussed us out. And it hurt my little green feelings. Because I really thought that if you were there to help somebody with kindness, they were going to reciprocate with obedience and gratitude. That's not the way it works with injured people. But my teacher staff was pretty mean to the little girl, said, you don't talk to us that way. And if you do again, you're going to hit the floor. And that happens all the time in inpatient facilities, hidden behind the walls of confidentiality. Well, she had help finding new employment because I was also doing an internship with the director. But again, culture. You know, I was up wiping down the unit one day because I was bored, and in orientation they said we should do that. And my 30-year veteran staff said, what are you doing, man? I said, I'm just saying, you know, cleaning up the unit. We don't have anything to do. It says, and he goes, you don't really have to do that. I said, well, it says, you know, in orientation that we're supposed to. He said, yeah, they got to tell you that. This is how it really goes on the unit, kid. Culture. And so we've got to understand the injuries of trauma, because if we're not careful, we'll punish them. We'll punish people for the very reasons they come to us for help. Because they make us mad, or they hurt our feelings, or they trigger our reactions. So we have to understand our own limbic system and our own nervous system in order to be able to successfully navigate and interact and not trigger you know, the injured person. I list all kinds of different non-conclusive trauma, because for some in America the trauma don't end. You know, being an African American, being a Mexican American, being a gay or lesbian American, being a woman in America, being a person with a disability in America. I tell you, they set up hazards for me in my hallway at work all the time. My boss has gotten pretty good over the years at helping them not bang my shins up by setting stuff that don't necessarily need to be in the hallway. But to see, the thing is, unless you've ever hung out with a vision impaired person, you would never think about it. You know, you just walk around it because you can see too. You know, and so so what we've really got to do is we've got to consider the experience that is not our own. Again, you can't, you know, somebody that's in a wheelchair, they may not be getting out of that wheelchair. A person like me may or may not get my vision back. I believe I'm the best looking blind social worker around. But I haven't seen a mirror in over a decade. So again, but for some, we could do something about this. You know, we can conclude trauma for many in our society, and it's really going to take everyone. We're going to have to. I don't know. There's all this talk about contagion. You know, the virus is contagious, and you know, emotions are contagious too. And so that's one of the things that I'm ready to start setting Oklahoma on fire for good. I'm ready to start sending some of my positive vibe out there and your positive vibe out there into our community. So we've got just a couple more minutes and then we're going to take a break. So I'm going to go over the symptoms of trauma really quickly. I did a UCLA PTSD index assessment over 2,000 times with children over several years at a children's hospital that I will not name. And so, but these are what I would term normal human symptoms. This is, and I did what's called psychological education groups with teenagers because they're really stigmatized when they've come to treatment a lot. You know, they're mentally ill, they're the mental kid, they're the, you know, they're all these labels. And I tell them, these are healthy responses to unhealthy experiences. This is what your body and brain is supposed to do when you're hurt bad. So re-experiencing an intrusive symptoms, that's where we think about things we don't want to think about. We remember things we don't want to remember. We have dreams that are disruptive to our feelings, flashbacks that can really take us out of our present. You know, it can come out of the blue or in response to triggers, and triggers can be anything in the environment that can connect to that file in our brain. Very often it's a visual, audio, or olfactory type of data that takes us back in time. And so a lot of kids are diagnosed with attention deficit because they're re-experiencing intrusive symptoms. It's hard to think about what you're supposed to think about if your brain is replaying events over and over again. And so the next set of symptoms is hyperarousal. That's the physical aspect of being harmed. That's the physical impression that trauma has made on our brain and then on our body. And so hyperarousal has to do with sleep problems, has to do with that exaggerated startle response. You know, there was a kid that I gave a high five. He saw me in the foyer. He said, "Jeremy, high five." And so I gave him a high five, and there was a kid behind him. Didn't know him as good, but he wanted a high five too. So I gave him a high five, and then all of a sudden I was giving kids high fives. And then there was another kid that wasn't paying attention. He was turned around in the line. He turns around, my hand's right here. He hits the deck. Hypervigilance. I didn't mean to trigger him, but I came to understand. But he didn't want to be treated like a weird kid either. He wanted high fives. But I just had to let him know, hey, I'm coming, up top, you know. I approached him in just a slightly different way that let him still get to be a kid to get a high five with the rest of the kids. But hyperarousal causes us to go from anxious to agitated to angry pretty quickly. It causes us to be overstimulated easily. It causes us to have tummy troubles. Bowel issues, changes in muscle tension, body temperature. This is the past intruding on the present physically. And again, back to the ADD, ADHD, a lot of kids with hyperarousal given a pill instead of exploring their needs for safety. And so the next set of symptoms, avoidance and numbing, dissociation. I would say that this one is the unconscious response to the others. Because again, our brains are wired to avoid pain, seek pleasure. That's our natural neurology. Avoid pain, seek pleasure. That makes sense, right? It makes perfect sense. But with more pain, we're going to seek more pleasure. We're going to be more need for relief. And now in ancient times, the ancient world was termed a world of scarcity. A world of scarcity, there was lots of danger and pain and not as much pleasure. So in this day and age, there's lots of pain and lots of pleasure. Digital pleasure, chemical pleasure, at the push of any button. If you got the means, you can have it. And so one of the problems with there being so many forms of pleasure, a lot of it's artificial pleasure. We've starting to forget what feels good. And people with trauma and chronic stress, maybe even of marginalization, are going to be more at risk for addiction and compulsive behaviors, poor eating habits and the like, because with more pain comes more need for relief. And it's usually not a conscious response. The ACEs study was actually discovered by studying obesity. They weren't studying adverse childhood experiences at first. Everybody lost weight. Then they left the program, they gained it back. And they realized when they studied each individual that it was trauma. They hadn't addressed the reasons people were eating. And so avoidant mechanisms. So, and one of the things too, you know, if you have your hand on a burner, your need is relief and your need is to cease with an injury. You know, kids have lots of needs. They need provisional needs, and they need love, and they need attention and acceptance, and to feel special to their family unit first. And a lot of times certain needs are going numb because they're not being met over an extended period of time. And it's damaging capacity. You see your rad kids, the kids that have a hard time attaching to people, those are the kids that have just been left back there to do nothing. Sometimes that's genetic, but sometimes that's environmental. Dissociation is something that's a self-preserving mechanism. When I got hit by the truck, I sat up, I was like, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. And then I looked at my legs and I saw that I was not. And then I laid down and everything went white. I went into shock. And that was something that we do it protects us from the reality, and all my pain receptors were full. In sexual assault and other types of victimizations, people often have dissociated as a way of surviving that event that they couldn't save themselves from. People have described like an out-of-body experience, or they could see that thing happening to them. Substance abuse is one of the most common injured behaviors, because injured people do injured behaviors to try not to feel their injured feelings. So absolutely. Dissociation. Now, it's also what people do when I get too long-winded. Their mind starts to wander. People start checking their phones and saying, when's this guy going to shut up? I need to check my Twitter feed, see what Elon Musk is doing. You know, but yeah, dissociation is common with trauma, because when we're being harmed, we shut off in a way. But the problem is that helps us when we're in trauma, but then it keeps happening. And then it's not as helpful when we're driving down the road or trying to pay attention in class or doing our job. You know? And so the last two categories, fear and distrust, shame and guilt. I see a lot of extremes. Post-traumatic stress is an anxiety disorder. But I see extremes with trust no one, build the wall up, or trust everyone and have poor boundaries and let everyone in to harm us. I see that a lot. And shame and guilt, we do see irrational guilt. We see police officers and soldiers and that felt like they should have been able to stop that bomb or that bullet. We see kids that said, I should have been able to stop that 250-pound man from raping my 40-pound body. People have irrational feelings about their trauma. Pain is not rational. And so, but one of the things too that I believe is the reason that we have so much shame is the fact that injured people do injured things, and those injured behaviors are often understood as bad behavior. And what do you do with bad behavior? You punish it. You shame it. You criticize it. You know, if we can make you feel bad enough about what you're doing, and maybe that'll make you better. But traumatized people have already feeling the shame. And so one of the things that I want to help injured people do is forgive themselves for being injured and doing exactly what injured people do. If we knew your ACE score, we would be able to predict within some accuracy what type of problems you would develop as an adult. That's because it's a human phenomenon. And so we've got to help people forgive themselves for being injured and doing injured, but we've got to use that forgiveness to rebuild self-esteem and to change what we're doing, because injured behaviors make us more injured. And our prisons are full of injured little boys and injured little girls that engage in so many injured behaviors and they didn't learn how to stop being injured. So I have been thoroughly enjoying this discussion with you guys this afternoon. Let's take a 15-minute break, and I will see you guys back here in a few minutes. Thank you guys. Hey, welcome back, everyone. I thoroughly enjoyed our first half of the discussion today. I've saved all the worst stuff for the second half because I knew it was going to scare you all away. Well, we're going to just jump right back in. I believe we're on this is your brain on trauma?
Yes.
Okay, so again, I am. They said that I am one of a limited number of trauma specialists in Oklahoma, trained by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Excuse me, and I just burped at you. And I'm proud of that. It does make me feel fancy. But I didn't do these brain scans, so I want you to understand that the difference with the injuries of trauma, it's not because Jeremy said so. And people don't walk around with brain scanners and heart monitors on, and so often we just see the behavior, especially if it pushes our feelings. Especially if it provokes some strong emotions from us. We all say, we want to help all kids, we want to help all people, and we want to be there for everyone all the time, but injured people will be injured with us. And they can provoke some really strong emotions. And injured people, again, like I said before, can challenge our ethics. Our ethics are to be there for everybody all the time, But again, we have to understand our own reactions to injuries because we got some of those brains too. And so what's next, Rob? Trauma can be generational. To see the people who take care of us be injured causes something called secondary or vicarious trauma, to have our caregivers hurt. But also, injured caregivers parent injured and sometimes hurt us. And so then that becomes direct trauma, first-hand trauma. And so trauma is something that can be taught, and it passes through us sometimes through physiology and through gene expression, but also through environment. The old argument whether it's nature versus nurture, but really it's both at play. And so I was going to say so, but one of the things that we know that generational trauma does and has done in states like Oklahoma is it normalizes being hurt. That's just the way it is. Now again, if one person on your block had child abuse, just one, and that was the only one, then people might, oh wow, that's the one. But again, we're on blocks and streets where most of us grew up with some abuse in one form or another, it sometimes makes it, you don't notice the injury as much. I say that Oklahoma is an injured forest, and we don't even notice despite all the fallen trees. They say you sometimes don't see the forest for the trees. Well, we don't sometimes see the injuries because we're all injured in some way, shape, or form. And so it does a special kind of harm when you think it's par for the course. I guess it's just because you accept your injury then. I never thought about that before. You accept your injury and then you just take it. And so, a lot of times when we learn our injuries and our injured behaviors, it's just your rite of passage. You don't want to go to jail, but that's what you do. I remember this one kid, the same kid I was telling you about before. I asked him, one of the symptoms of trauma is having poor future orientation, because when you've had to live in survival mode, you're not very good at planning for down the road. You have to think for now. And that's an adaptation, a necessary one. And so I asked the kid, I said, well, what do you want to do when you grow up, man? Your hopes and dreams. Probably go to jail. I said, well, dude, why would you want to do that? I don't understand. He goes, well, I was I listed all the things that I could think of that would be bad about jail. He said, yeah, but that's what we do in my family. And what a detrimental familiarity. Because again, this kiddo, his uncle, his brother, his dad, the major players in his life were incarcerated. And so he felt like eventually at some point, he felt bad, and then he engaged in injured behaviors through familiarity and through need for relief. And then when it was his time to go, it was just that tragic rite of passage, getting his stripes. So a lot of dysfunctional norms are passed from generation to generation, pre-logic, like we said before. So what's next, Travis? The mouse study?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was a study of little mice. I didn't do this, so don't be mad at me. And again, I know we do terrible things to little lab animals or whatever, and that's not great, but we're doing worse things to people. So I will bleed my hearts for the little mouses once we're taking care of all of our people, all the babies. And you know, and babies, that's another big talk, you know, that people will get their feelings really up about, and I won't go there. If you're about babies, protect them then. All of them. You know, if you're pro-life, then go help some of the lives that you saved. You know, whatever. So, but again, in this mouse study, they took little male mice and they shocked them, and then they exposed them to the smell of cherry blossom. Shock them, cherry, shock them, cherry, shock them, cherry. After a while, an association had been formed. So after a while, they didn't even have to shock them. Those mice were scared of cherries. They were. They showed visible fear, and they'd been mouse traumatized. Mice can have trauma. Their nervous systems are actually quite similar to ours. That's why we use them for so many studies, because of that similarity and its ability to replicate in our own system. So they gave them mouse PTSD with cherry smells, and then they let these mice have babies. Anyone heard of this study? Okay, so they shocked them, and then they gave them the cherry trauma, and then they let them have babies, and then those babies had babies, and then the babies had babies. So for 3 generations, they had some mouse pups. And I don't know if they turned on Barry White, turned the lights down low, and or whatever. No, I'm just kidding. But what the generations of pups were scared of cherry blossom, and they never had been shocked. And so just to show you some control experiment for comparison, mice, they don't mind cherry smell. They're looking for cherry pie. And so, and one of the things that I think should be noted about these mice, their DNA had not been altered. Their DNA was the same, but through gene expression, environment had altered how the gene manifested. And that happens with people too. As far as the illnesses and things we do or don't get, you know, there's a lot that affects the way our genes manifest in physical development. And so again, this leads me to as many questions as answers, but thinking about the brutal past of American history, you know, some people probably had an innate feeling of fear, and it probably wasn't a smell. It might have been a face. It might have been a pigment. You know, because again, I wasn't there. We didn't do it. I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation, a proud member, and I'm also Caucasian and Irish and all this other stuff. Where was I going with that, Travis? Oh yeah, Jenner. I was going somewhere. Oh yeah, I got it back. Sometimes it gets derailed, but we can get back on track. But again, there are some people that maybe the white face was the cherry blossom, and so you know, I've told you guys before, I think everybody might be a little bit racist, but as long as we can search that out within ourselves, you know, if there's a certain type of voice that don't sound as pleasant to us as another kind of voice, we want to make sure that we don't use that as a basis for discrimination, because we do sometimes react to difference, and we don't always do so consciously. So we've got to search for the unconscious. What's next?
Marginalized populations.
Yeah, so when I think about marginalized, when I think about a margin first, you know, when I started really just breaking down the term, I think, you know, I start breaking down words, you know, and a margin is, you know, the part, it's what I remember is the part of the page that it didn't matter as much. It was on the side, you didn't use it, it wasn't the good part of the page. You pushed it over to the side. And so there's a lot of people that have been made to matter less. And again, because it's not, you know, it's not one person's experience. And there's a ruling few, you know, the people that own slaves in this country, they're still doing pretty good. You know, and while other generations of people were not able to pass along wealth and health, you know, that was denied to a great many people. A lot of people that are not affected by this, you know, for instance, well, I mean, I live in a largely Caucasian community, so people that look at each other and say, well, we're nice to each other, everything's fine, you know, I mean, we're nice to people that are different to us when we see them, you know, right? And so a lot of times I think we can be quite oblivious to what's really happening in some of the communities that were meant to fail. You know, there were people that didn't want to see the indigenous brother or sister do well in the United States of America. They called them barbarians and less than human, dehumanized them and justified their harm. And then they put them on places called reservations. And reservations didn't have very good soil, didn't have very good hunting, didn't have very good water sources, didn't have very good resources. And those who wished to see the indigenous man fail said, see, look at him over there, struggling and in poverty and drinking. And, you know, and see, the thing is, in any community of beings, not even human, you could look at dogs or look at horses or look at, you know, I have 2 puppies at home, big stupid ones. And if one of them's got food and the other doesn't for long enough, these brother dogs who love each other very much, they start fighting. They start growling at each other. And communities where there's a population where there's just not enough, there's going to be crime, there's going to be violence, there's going to be dysfunction, mental illness and addiction, and a grappling for power. You know, we see so much indigenous on indigenous crime and black on black crime in the inner city communities. Again, and that's the remnants of Jim Crow. That's the remnants of redlining districts. And then you'd be surprised how into the recent past certain populations were not allowed to get home loans outside of certain communities. We're going to contain you in that ghetto and watch you struggle there. You know, and again, where your role models are fewer. You know, a lot of kids were getting into gangs because they met emotional needs for them. Yes. You know, and people, they were wondering why the Nancy Reagan method, just say no. You know, don't you guys know drugs and gangs are bad? It's bad for you, and it's illegal too, don't you know? Just say no. But the kids that didn't have any other way to meet some of their needs were being met, needs for provision and protection in the group, for attention and acceptance, social and emotionally. There was dysfunctional ways to meet these needs, but they were meeting needs. So, what slide is this again?
Marginalized population.
Yeah, marginalized population. So anyway, there's just people that didn't want to see African Americans succeed in America. And so when people from the ghetto struggled, they said, see, look at those people. And so, you know, I showed a movie clip. I should have showed it to you guys today about Seabiscuit. I don't know, there's this horse. And you know, he was not a very good horse, they thought. So they trained other horses, and he was trained to lose. You know, and so I feel like so many in our society are, you know, losing like we prepared them to do. So anyway, what's next, Travis?
Christian counseling.
Okay. And so first and foremost, I am not saying that Christian counseling is necessarily a bad thing. I think people need to kind of explore what it is that they mean when they say Christian counseling. Does Christian counseling, does it mean I'm going to use the love that is in my heart to motivate my efforts to help all people in every way that I can? I'd be okay with that form of Christian counseling. Is it a flag being put up that says, only people like me are welcome? And if you're from certain populations, you are very definitely not welcome. Well, I've been in contact with our state boards for licensure because I do speak with mental health professionals. I do inform the public, and I want to inform the public appropriately. I don't want to just say what feels right to me, because that's what a lot of people are doing when they close that office door. And so one of the things that I feel like people are arguing, it's either science, 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 or it's religion, 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 and those two are not incompatible, and I don't know where they somehow became so. If we're saying God created everything, okay, say that. Science is chasing it down, trying to understand it. But one of the things, so I asked, because it's my understanding that some gay and lesbian people are being turned away, or transgender people are being turned away because of religious principles. We're a nation founded on freedom of religion, not to have a state or national religion. Some are trying to take it the other way and use it to harm anyone who doesn't agree. That's happening. That's happening to people I love. And it's not okay. And so the reality is, so I asked them, what the board said was the appropriate thing to do if someone had been turned away based on their gender. And he said, well, if they're being told that they're not welcome here because of that, that is a violation of ethics. But if they're being told that I don't understand your situation enough, I don't feel competent enough to help you with your issues, I might have to refer out, that would technically be okay. If people are saying that they're not willing to get to know somebody else enough, and if they're saying that really I'm not good enough at my job, that's what I say about it. And so that actually happened. I was a therapist in a facility out in southeastern Oklahoma, out there in a rural area, kind of. And I almost said the old thing, the mentally, a person with a developmental disability came to me in tears. She wasn't my patient. She was one of the other clinicians' patients. And she was told that because she lived with a woman, she was going to hell by the person who's supposed to help her. And she only had a little bit of time to repent from that because the world was going to end in 2012, he told. This was a practicing clinician, no longer. He had help getting out of the profession. But the thing is, we don't know what's being said behind those office doors. And so go to the next slide, Travis. So again, we can believe what we want to believe. And we can, you know what, you can believe people who are gay are going to hell. If you want to believe that, now you're contrary to known science as far as it being a choice. Because people who get beat up, who get picked on, who have their rights threatened, who are made to feel less than human, I promise you, if they could just choose to be what gets them less, flack from society, they'd choose it. I don't remember choosing to like girls. I remember, I'll tell you guys an early experience. I'm maybe going to overshare, but I was a little boy. And I remember there was a TV show called The Fall Guy. And the pretty girl on the show walks through the saloon doors in a two-piece one time, and I remember sitting up one day, I was maybe 5 or 6, and It was good. And it wasn't a choice. But one of the things that, and I think I've got a slide to show you this, a gay man's brain and a gay woman's brain is different neurologically and structurally as far as their brain. And so it's okay to think suicide means you damn yourself to hell. You can think that, and maybe that can be the basis for you trying to get people to not do that. But again, if you wield your values, if you wield your beliefs in a harmful way, you're violating ethics. And I think, according to the religion that a lot of people are claiming, that's not love. And so I woke up one morning, I get these phrases in my head sometimes, maybe it's from God. I think maybe it is. I don't think God is a man or a woman. I don't think God has any use for genitals. But I'll tell you this, that's not the phrase that came to my mind though. The phrase that came to my mind is that love applied logically is always the answer. Love applied logically is always the answer. And so if you don't understand them and you react to them a little bit, try to love them and understand them a little bit. Because I don't know what it's like to be anyone but Jeremy. Again, my friend, he tried to be straight, and he hated himself, and he was depressed, and again, the right hemisphere of a gay man's brain is more similar in structure and size and function to a hetero woman's brain. And similarly, a lesbian woman's brain on the right side is more similar to that of a male, a hetero male. And I can't choose, we can't choose that part of our functioning. We can't choose that part of our development. You can't choose what color your eyes are. You can put some contacts in, but again, certain aspects of our development are not, and I had a guy slam his book shut and storm out after paying me $80 for a day's worth of training. He didn't get his money back. I appreciated his donation. So again, this fires a lot of people up, but it doesn't have to. I don't know what is so threatening about being okay, because it's not contagious. It's not something that kids are going to catch, It's fear. It's absolutely fear. And what's the basis of fear always been? Again, money. You see, the thing is, if gay people were together in a partnership and one of them died, even if a family disowned them and said, "You're scum, we don't want to know you," they still get your stuff instead of your partner for the longest time. Yeah. Now that's some of that's changing now. But those rights are in danger. Anyway, well, parallel process. If we're not careful, we can start to mirror some of the dysfunction that we see. Emotion is contagious. But a lot of people engage in some of these similar patterns of behavior, and they reenact their trauma over and over again, and they'll reenact it with you. A lot of people are doing a dysfunctional dance. They're just looking for another partner to dance with. And so, but a lot of times, people are reenacting their trauma because of dysfunctional coping skills, and that's what they had. If the worst problem you ever had in your life actually got solved, and you solved it with a hammer, guess what? Everything's going to start looking like a nail. And so we have to help people not reenact their trauma and not play that role, because again, there was a little boy, he was a Native American boy, and he was very injured and very violent. And he would hurt us. I mean, really hurt us. He was a really big kid, and he didn't speak to us for 3 days. I wasn't sure if he could speak or how verbal he actually was, but he wasn't talking to us. And if you got too close, his hypervigilance means you was catching a heavy hand. And so we had to physically intervene with him sometimes. And we didn't do it with hostility or aggression. I was so proud of the way we interacted with this kid because he was hurting us and we did our best not to hurt him. And one day, after we'd engaged in a hold for over 40 minutes one time with him, and I was part of that. We were all exhausted and sore. And I saw him later, and we kept asking him, "Are you breathing okay? Can we let you up? We're not trying to hurt you. You know, we're not." Because a lot of people, when they put him in a hold, "You little shit, don't you ever do that to me again. You know, don't you ever disrespect us." One of the initiatives of our grant was to reduce seclusion and restraint, to not hold kids or put them down any more than we had to, you know, because as it turns out, people with physical and sexual trauma need us to not touch them any more than we, you know, have to. Imagine that. You know, people are that way in general. Don't like to be touched any more than you have to be. So anyway, so I saw the kid. He was doing better after a little while. And he was in the area playing with other kids, and he was smiling. I saw his teeth, and they weren't biting anyone. And I said, "Man, you're doing better. I'm proud of you, buddy. High five, you know." And said, "Man, what's better for you? How have we helped?" Because I always want to learn what we're doing right that we can replicate. He said, "When I first got here, I was bad." I said, "Man, you were an injured kid doing what injured kids do." I thought that sounded really smart, you know. He said, "Yeah, but I was bad. I was really tearing the place up and hurting people. And remember hitting and kicking and spitting." I said, "Yeah, I remember. That was gross." He goes, "And that's when I knew y'all cared." "What do you mean?" Because y'all wouldn't do it back. And so a lot of times kids expect us to be bad to them, and if they can make us be bad to them, then that fits their worldview. Their worldview is preserved, and I don't have to break down and think about nothing any differently. Maybe all white people are not necessarily a bad thing. If I've got to slow down and talk to you and think as a person. You know, so again, people will reenact their trauma with you. Sometimes they know they're doing it, and sometimes they don't. You know, a person that's been sexually assaulted, been the victim of rape or domestic violence, is astronomically more likely to be victimized again. Is that because people like being victimized? It's an adaptation. Now, sometimes our sense of who's safe and what is safe and our proximity to abusers is all relative factors. But when we adapt to dysfunction, it sets us in motion in a certain way. So anyway, traumatic reenactment and parallel process. What's next?
Measurable marginalization.
And so these are some statistics. And so I won't read to you the stats. We know that Native Americans and African Americans are largely have many injured outcomes as far as we're incarcerated. Young guys are incarcerated at higher rates for longer sentences for similar crimes and similar criminal history. One of the things that I find to be really boggling as a member of the Cherokee Nation is the suicide rates among indigenous men. And so Native American men make up approximately 6%. I think this is on the next slide, Travis. It's on this one? Okay. Native American men make up approximately 6%, or Native Americans, men and women, make up 6% of Oklahoma's population. So that means Native American men make up much less than 6%. And yet Native American men account for about 25% of the suicide in our state, according to the CDC. That's astronomical. That's boggling. And if you think about it though, you think about humans as an adaptable species. Well, I looked up what it means to adapt. I looked it up in the dictionary. I didn't like the definition, so I wrote my own. And so my definition of adaptation is a developmental flexibility. And that sounded pretty smart.
Yep.
A developmental flexibility to the fact that, you know, we have to roll with the punches and change a little bit, or we break with the change. We're destroyed by change. And so we live in a very frustrating and discouraging and scary world. And one of the adaptations to that is we start to frustrate and discourage and scare ourselves sometimes. So one of the adaptations that I feel like to self-destruction, or is self-destruction, because indigenous people and African people over time have been destroyed in many ways. The culture, you know, Native American people weren't even allowed to talk in their culture, dress in their culture. And then when they went back to the boarding schools, there was such a huge disconnect between them and their families. You know, I had a gentleman come down after one of our talks. He was just in tears after we were talking about some of the things of trauma. He hadn't thought about it in so long. But being hit for talking like you were naturally born to talk. And all the different traumas. But one of the things that I see is if you hurt people long enough over generations, they start to do it to themselves. And especially in inner city communities and reservations where scarcity has been guaranteed. What's next, Travis? Yeah, so one of the things that I will say about Oklahoma and our injured outcomes, Oklahoma is #1 in the world, not the nation, the world, for locking up mommies. We lock up more women than anyone anywhere. And now we're #2 in the nation per capita for males. And that's just nationwide. We didn't get global on that one. But, you know, as an Okie, you know what, I question, what does this mean? What does it mean? I mean, we're bad people. No, we're injured. And we've got all kinds of injured outcomes to show for it. And we live in a capitalist system. And I'm not totally anti-capitalism. It has no business in medicine. It has no business in treatment. It has no business in education. And it has no business in corrections. Because there can't be people over there leaning on the government to make as many things as possible illegal and give us as many reasons to take people's freedom away from them as possible. And we know that we do that astronomically more to black and brown peoples. And so again, we've got to do away with systems that put profit over people. Because again, they just see these numbers, you know, and it goes to the lowest bidder, you know, as far as, you know, who can check all the mandate boxes, but still do it at the lowest, you know, dollar amount. And some of the guys in prison, they did an expose, and they were talking about, I guess they forgot to take it off some of the containers. It says not for human consumption right there on the box. It was dog food level quality of meats. You know, a lot of them rotten kind of and stuff like that. Again, in a system that was stacked against us from the beginning. You know, it's just, the ACEs study shows that the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the shorter that your life is. The more miserable your life is, the more likely addiction and incarceration are. And it's just not fair that experiences that happen at such a young age can dictate the outcomes over here. We can do something about that. That's something I'm real proud of. I think we are doing something about that here. I know a few of us are. It ain't all banjos and burning crosses here in Oklahoma. A few of them though. So there, you can just see some statistics there. And I'm not going to go over that, but there was a book written some years ago called The Culture of Poverty, and now to say a culture of poverty is a kind of a taboo way of putting it, because a young lady who was a student who was working with me, she said that's kind of like blaming the poor for being poor. Well, that's not what I mean when I think about a culture of poverty. I think the normalization of it, getting used to having little. And one of the things we see in these populations, addiction runs high. You know, in families that don't have much, they've often still prioritized for that, you know, carton of cigarettes, case of beer, you know. and different things. And we judge those people for that. But again, we didn't see the hand on the burden. I've judged poor people that always got to have their cigarettes. I found myself saying, well, if you didn't just, but again, then I've got to remember, because I'm a trauma specialist and I'm supposed to be perfect all the time, right? But no, I react to stuff too. But I catch myself, and then I recognize that I don't know like the song said, and then you really might know what it's like, to sing the blues, to have to lose, to have to choose. It's a good song, by the way. So, anyway, what's next, Trav?
Microaggressions.
So, my friend Will does this slide so much better than me. But there are microaggressions. What are the other ones?
Micro-assaults, micro-insults.
Micro-insults. And so, a lot of times he describes it as death by 1,000 cuts. People that, he went to church with and said, you know what? We love you anyway. And we're praying for you. One of the things that I forgot to mention, I think in the early mishaps in treatment, is those conversion camps. And some places are trying to bring those back. They are documented, factually harmful to human people, to kids. And politics is pushing that crap into treatment forums once again. And again, ethical clinicians are going to just have to keep being ethical. We're just going to have to kind of keep our head down and do the right thing. And let everybody else be, about the nonsense. But we need to, be aware of the fact that we could demonstrate micro-insults, microaggressions, if we're not careful. Because again, I felt some judgment, some aggression, some hostility at times in other parts of my life when I saw the poor family that always had the substances. But again, didn't know what that poor family had been through. So again, one of the things that people say, well, what do we do with this knowledge? We just want to, all hold hands and sing Kumbaya? But one of the things as a treatment professional, I'm not going to tell a black person how to be black or a woman how to be a woman. But one of the things that I can do as a trauma specialist is help you understand symptoms. And one of the things that I also recognize is, people say, well, that's reverse racism. Reverse racism. I don't know if, the minority group that's not in power can necessarily inflict harmful racism on the larger group. To be, reactive to a white person, that's part of the injury. Now, if we're going to go into it and say, you know what, all white people are bad. You know what, they're crackers, or whatever. Then that would be giving on over to hate. That would be deciding, you know what, I'm going to be like mine enemy. And you can't, again, nobody wins. Nobody wins. Because again, Africans and Asians and Latinos and Europeans wouldn't naturally exist on one continent together, but here we are. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? When we pledged allegiance to the flag when I was a kid, liberty and justice for all, I believed it. It felt good to believe it. And then you realize when you grow up it wasn't quite that way, but I believe that it should still be our aspiration. But we are stepping backward. We are regressing as a society in this way because the voices of few are loud and hostile. So what's next, Travis?
Exploring our blind spots.
Okay, so this is basically just about watching out for what we might not be aware of. We don't know what we don't know. And so I think it's important for us to look back into our own timeline and say, all right, well, did anyone use racist language? And just start to break down how we come by our own norms and how our own instincts formed. What's normal to us? And so, what's the name of this slide again?
Exploring our blind spots.
Yeah, exploring our blind spots. One of the things, I think, since we can all be so reactive, we need to practice something called being mindful. And I think that's a term more and more people are using these days. You guys heard of being mindful? Yes. Okay. Well, I think it's increasingly important as we spread our attention and our energy thinner and thinner. We go on autopilot a lot. And we can sometimes just do things without thinking, too much about it or whatever. So they did a study of trained conductors and trained personnel in Japan, and they had them each speak the action and point to the action as they were engaging in the action, and it reduced errors by 50%. So if we just slow down and be a little bit more conscious of what we're doing, saying what we're doing, why we're doing it, understanding those parts of our motivations and instincts, I think we can be watchful of putting that foot in our mouth a little bit sometimes. Saying something that makes somebody else feel less. And understanding that we're living in an increasingly hyper-vigilant, hypersensitive nation. We got injuries reacting to injuries, reacting to injuries. And we need to slow down and take a breath. I believe it's up to people like you and I to heal an injured nation right now. I really do. I don't think politicians are going to get it done. So I think it's going to be up to you and I to bring some civility and some sanity and some calm back into our world if it's going to come. So, what's next, Travis?
Thinking more about gender.
Yeah. I think it's important to kind of examine where we get our ideas of what it means to be a boy or a girl, a man or a woman. There are certain things that come with the physiological territory. Women have babies, men, the things that are obviously only women can do and obviously only men can do. But a lot of the other stuff has been decided by somebody else, and it's just because it's always been done that way. There's a lot of boys around here afraid to wear pink. In I believe ancient Greek or Rome, pink was the color of valor given to the warrior. So I mean, what's different? I mean, because I guarantee you, to people, the big, broad-chested hero wearing pink, and all the little boys looking up to him, that looked like a manly color. And wearing a dress or a kilt or long pants. I mean, again, we come by these norms because that's the way it's always been done. And we need to be willing to question that a little bit, because some of it, I guess, makes sense, and some of it is just because it's always been that way. And some of that always been that way thinking is how people get hurt. And so big boys, boys don't cry, and there's all kinds of things. We are harmed by our very definitions of gender, of femininity and masculinity. We are harmed by our concept of strength sometimes. So anyway, I think that we really need to let little boys, play with whatever they want to play with. I mean, not like forks and light sockets, but I mean, dads that are rushing to get that doll out of the kid's hand because it's got long hair, so he can give him a G.I. Joe with short hair. It's just a little bit smaller, different doll with weapons. But trying to make little girls play with only feminine things and teaching them that they're gonna, here's your little shopping thing, and here's your little, Susie Homemaker kit. We need to watch how we're programming our kids to be anything but who they are. I'm father of a daughter, and it's been quite a journey. I've learned to play with all kinds of different things, and as a 44-year-old guy, you have to
kind of go to their level a little bit. There's a lot of things that, she's not interested in my stuff, so I got to be interested in her stuff. That's why, I know about Monster High dolls. So anyway, I think that we're good on that slide. Questions or comments, guys? I know I go kind of fast. So, if you have a burning question or comment, feel free to jump in anytime, and y'all have been great at that. So, this one's a hard one for me. I've been talking the way that I've been talking for a long time, all my life. And so, I do not have a problem calling people what they want to be called. And I don't understand what it's like to be somebody else. But to say that's nonsense, that's a phase, that's a fad, that's, whatever. To dismiss it because it's unfamiliar is wrong. And it puts us in the boat with some of those other people that we don't want to be in the boat with. It's harmful. Again, it's hard to keep up with some of these terms. So I gave you a list, and we'll send you this if you would like. Send us an email and tell us you want the PowerPoint, please, and I will absolutely send it to you. But one of the things that I've gotten my head bit off a little bit. If I call somebody their gender that they traditionally appear and sound, anybody, and they prefer them. And that's hard because for me, them and they is plural. I felt like saying, you know what, I want you to call me it. But that was a kind of defensive reaction. That's what I wanted to say. But again, I don't know what it's like. And so, it's really interesting. I was listening to some stuff on NPR. There was a lady that was an African athlete, and it was really good in track and done some really great things. And then they'd done some testing on her, and hormonally speaking, she had too high levels of testosterone. Now, she had female anatomy, but hormonally speaking, it was a little bit off, and it was not based on any drug or any supplement or anything like that. And so people think that gender is so definitively in one side or the other, and it's not. There's a reason everybody's got nipples, because in our embryonic state, it was going to go one way or the other. We were all one or the other at one point, in between, in that earliest stage. So anyway, I find stuff like that fascinating because you can lack the anatomy of male, but according to the Olympic committee, qualify as male based on hormone levels. So again, gender is not this. It's much more fluid than we realize. And those of us that did fall pretty definitively into one category or the other, we can be thankful. Because we don't know what it's like to have some of both going on. And in a world that wants to fit everything into a neat, tidy little, peg hole, it would be a pretty scary place to not feel like you fit in anywhere. And so I asked for, gay, lesbian, and transgender, differently identified people to be patient with me and to allow me to be what I would call orientationally humble. I mean, sometimes with a hypervigilant person that's opening up some painful stuff for one of the first times perhaps, nothing you could have said might have been right. Exactly. But I will say this, sometimes sitting quietly and just sometimes when people say, I was like, wow. Wow. Because emotions are electrical impulses that our brain produces, and they get stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's what I tell them. They're going to come out of us one way or another, or they're going to stay in and fail to address our need, and they're going to make us sick. Absolutely. So, but good questions and good support from within the group. Absolutely. What's next, Travis? This is discussion time. You guys have any little racist wannabes looking up to y'all? It's you know, you've got some power if you do. If they do. If you've got any kids looking up to you, be careful that you don't reject them because of how we detest their values. Because again, when they're kids, those ain't even their values.
Right.
They're regurgitating what they know. They're just spitting it out right as if been told to them. And so I got a kid that got in trouble for wearing a Confederate flag as a cape and getting in some trouble with his peers in the hallway at school. Some didn't like that. You know, imagine that. But this little guy, he used to say things in session that would just make me sick. And then I'd be like, wow, you're a kid. And I remember that, again, so much dysfunctional data goes into a kid's brain, and they don't get to choose, you know, all right, good data, bad data, all right, I'm going to block that data and let this data in. No, they don't get to do that. And so this kid didn't have, and if I rejected him, matter of fact, if I rejected him, he was going to be lost to those values. And so I don't want to overinflate my role because I am certainly not supposed to be a savior, you know, a white savior. I'm not supposed to be that. But the thing is, we brought him on over to the side of right and good and brain. And it wasn't for bashing him for his beliefs, but it was by asking leading questions that help him come to a different conclusion. You know, all right, so it's all, you know, it's all black people in the welfare line. Is that right? Have you ever been to the welfare line? You know, I have. I've been down to the DHS. There's mostly white people there. Really? I'll tell you the address. You can go there now. And so people don't like to be told that they're wrong, even when we know they're wrong. But I will say this, right and wrong, the whole concept of right and wrong is a human construct. Ask a rock floating through space what right or wrong means. You know, and so it's a human construct that we've come up with, and most of us want to agree that there is something that is right or wrong, but it is something that we come up with as people. We decide if something is right or wrong, and not everybody agrees on that. There's decreasing consensus on what right is and is not. So anyway, what slide is this?
That was the questions.
Okay, so.
Back in rational beliefs.
Yeah, well, that's kind of more about what I'm saying. I've heard, you know, in this era of division, I've lost friends, you know, lost family members, you know, and I think early on I didn't always react well to some of the different views that I was hearing. But one of the things that I've gotten better at doing is, so did that happen to you? Was that your experience? Did you lose your job because of a Mexican? Did you, and again, because a lot of times they are spouting stereotypical things, but when it comes right down to identifying their own experience, they can't, you know. I know way more white a-holes than I do of any other gender because just sheer proximity. I know more white people, you know. So yeah, but back to our motivational interviewing and helping people, you know, unpack some of these beliefs that don't necessarily make sense, and not necessarily wanting to argue and tell people, no, here's what you need to believe. People reject that pretty quickly. You know, when we apply any kind of pressure, if Travis stood up here next to me and I lean on him with my shoulder and I push and I say, don't let me push you over, in order to do that, he's going to sturdy himself with his other foot, he's going to push back. And the reality is, physical or psychological pressure always gets pushed back in order to not be pushed over. People don't want to get pushed over. So I want to help them arrive at the conclusion. Because I do believe that all people are created equal. I do believe that that's what we're supposed to promote in our world. I believe that truly we're only as strong as our weakest link, and the weakest links are taking us down. And so I saw something that said, when we're all well, we're all well. And the opposite certainly can be true as well. So yeah, we want to support community. Now I think diversity and being connected with different kinds of people are important, but we feel safe with people who are like us. And so we need to allow for after school groups. We need to help build the communities that will help people who are different than us feel safe, and we need to support that. We need to advocate for that. So one of the things is, when we're helped by people like us, I think it can help us navigate some of the perils of that marginalization. Have role models, have examples of people who have made it, especially when role models have been scarce. We've got to find those. But absolutely, we've got to support community, and diverse community and like community. This is the 8th chapter of my book, or part of it anyway. Identify, challenge, and change. And so, first off, like I was mentioning before, human beings have the great power to influence the ongoing development of our brain based on what we do. That's powerful, because if you come from where I come from, and you only got to know what you knew coming up, from that place, then you were going to be kind of limited. But there was such great potential for more learning. And so, first off, we've got to identify where and how we were injured. In history class, they taught us these timelines, left to right. So we've got to go back far to the left on our timeline and find our injuries first. And then we need to move forward on the timeline and start to identify when we had engaged, when we started adopting maladaptive coping. When we started engaging in injured behaviors to try not to feel our injured feelings. Because when we were 12 or 13 or 14, we might not have known that's what we were doing. And what we've got to do, again, is forgive ourselves for being injured, not to excuse injured behavior and say, all right, it's okay that I do this because I'm injured, not for those reasons, but rather to make a change, because recovery from addiction, from trauma, from depression, from mental illness, it's hard. And you've already likely been shamed and punished and criticized and stigmatized for the symptoms of your injury. And so you've got to forgive yourself enough to rise to the challenge of recovery, and then you've got to do something different. And so one of the things that I work with people on is something I call making coping real. I know a lot of people who have been therapied to death, and they could recite to you 101 coping skills that they never use. And so we've got to rehearse those things, and we've got to make it real with people, and we've got to help people understand that new coping means healing. Anyway, I've got 3 reasons to cope. So if you're a note taker, you can have your pen ready. But for one, relief. Coping is to achieve relief. And to alter our neurology, our physiology, and our physical and emotional state when we're not doing so well. So the second reason, again, is because we're not as functional. When our stress levels are high, when our neurochemicals are high, when our electrical impulses from our emotions and stresses are high, we are not as functional. We're not as focused and attentive. We don't have as much access to our logic and reasoning and our intellect. So we've got to calm those responses down so we can think and function. And then the third reason that we do this, again, the first one was relief, the second one was for functionality, and the third one is for healing. So when you cope in a new way over and over and over again, it means you're not coping in the old way. You're not hurting yourself anymore. And as you do the new coping skill again and again and again, you're forging new neural pathways in your own brain, development of your choosing. That's power. The world gave you these injuries, you gave yourself the healing. I like that. So, I couldn't help being an injured kid. I was a pretty injured kid. I was in the juvenile detention center, and I had to go through the Scared Straight program. I was one of those kids. I was fighting hard to get out of the dumpster. And so I feel like people let me out. Some of the kids are getting a foot on their head and getting pushed on in. And so a lot of us wanted to have a life. A lot of us wanted to be okay. So now on ICC, now that we've identified our injuries and our maladaptive coping, and we've transplanted new coping skills, and we've repeated that, and we've changed our trajectory. Because ACEs means you have a shorter life, but if we attack those injured behaviors early and often, we're going to extend that life and change those trajectories in a significant way. And so, but also I think that we have to identify, challenge, and change some things that are happening in our world. We have to identify the injuries that are happening, and we have to prevent them. We have to promote safety and equality for all, obviously. Not so obvious to everyone. Yeah, not to everybody. And so, this thing still working? Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah. Okay, cool. I hold my mouth away from it a little. I want to blow y'all up. So, but anyway, so when it comes to racial inequality, when it comes to ignorance, I like watching old shows from my youth. For, I guess, clearly sometimes it's not for the acting quality. I've been watching some Tim the Tool Man. I like the wisdom of old Wilson next door. He said, well, Tim, ignorance is the breeding ground for discrimination. He goes, and a man who forms an opinion that is not based on fact is a fool. I like a good old Wilson. So anyway, we've got to be willing to stand up. We've got to be willing to stand up and to let our voices be heard, because the truth is in danger. People that get up and say what really is happening in the world are getting threatened a lot. But I'm going to live my values to whatever end rather than die an old coward. If somebody wants to gun me down because I'm telling the truth, then let the cards fall where they are. I hope I get to keep being daddy. But I won't be a coward. I won't not use my voice to stand up because my little girl don't get to be as safe as me in the world. My best friend, some of my closest, people in my life, they don't get to be as safe as me in the world. And until they are, I'm ready to fight. But we got to fight with this and with this, not just with this. So one of the things, because men are in such positions of power, the male body is differently structured. So in some physical capacities there is different strength, but not in cognitive capacities. Brain is equal. And in many ways women have different strengths physiologically and everything. But right now we see increasingly in our society many are being harmed by their concept of what it means to be strong. Society and men. Men are being harmed by what they define of being strong. You don't talk about your feelings. You just hold it in till you're sick or till you let it out by yelling at people or driving too fast or drinking too much. You guys see what Will Smith did. Now again, none of us had to go home with Jada that night if he didn't do, But again, Will went and did what he did. And did he do that for Jada or did he do that for Will?
Will.
Yeah. Exactly. And so we've got to be willing to, because I think it's okay to want to be manly. But men cry. We have tear ducts. We have emotional, processes that are quite similar. And if we deny those, it doesn't make us less manly. It makes us less intelligent. This one guy, he told me, he said, I don't talk about my feelings. I just have to see you once a month. Will you sign my paper? I said, well, I'm supposed to help you. I really want to help you. I'm supposed to do your therapy. I don't want to call it therapy. I said, well, all right, well, can we talk about the electrical impulses in your brain? Because they're getting stronger and stronger. And if you don't know how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way, then your feelings are going to come out of you in ways that you don't want them to come out because your electrical impulses are shocking you. I said, never thought of it that way before. I said, yeah, so you can be aware of it or not, but it's happening. And it can happen with you and by your choice, or it can happen to you. I like that. So again, toxic masculinity, it's toxic not just for the man, it's toxic for all of us. We're being harmed by what we view. We're being made weaker by what we view as strong. So in the 9th and final chapter of my book, it's called the 4 Ps. Potential, productivity, pride, and purpose. In psychology class, Mr. Maslow said you had these hierarchy of needs. Your basics on the bottom, then your emotional needs, your basic emotional needs, food and shelter and clothing on the bottom, then love and acceptance and attention next, feeling important and special and connected to your people. And then all the way at the top was reaching your potential and fulfillment. Self-actualization, absolutely. And they believe that reaching full self-actualization is impossible because that means you would have to maximize every single opportunity for growth. Who could ever do that? Everybody takes a day off and watches a game show or something. So I don't know. But for me, as a person with a disability, I'll tell you, when I first started losing my vision, I was advised not to, because it was becoming very hard for me to do my job. It was becoming very, very difficult for me to get to work, to see my work, to type it, and so I was really struggling a lot. And so now people who loved me, people who cared about me, friends and family had advised me to stop struggling, to file for disability, to give up my home, to give up my independence, to give up my career, to find a family member to go and live with, pick up a hobby, hang out, wait to die. I was 30. I didn't really want to do that. I felt like there was still something that even as a disabled person, I could do something, right? Maybe go be a greeter at Walmart. I don't know. I could do something. But I believe that every single person has potential. And beyond that, I believe every single person is the Michael Jordan of something. I believe that every single person has things that they're either good at or could be good at, and not just good, great. But a lot of people are unhappy and unfulfilled because they're walking around not really ever reaching into their potential, not doing what they're here to do. And so a lot of people engage in all kinds of pacified and not so productive outlets. And we all need to be unproductive sometimes. We need that. But if we live on vacation, if we live on video games, if we live on YouTube and TV, then what ends up happening is, we got nothing to show for our time and our energy, our efforts, and our depression goes up. If we have too much time to think about our problems, then we think about our problems. We dwell on our problems. We come up with some new ones even. We build on them. We have a need to show something for our time. We have a need to experience some pride in self. Now, some religious principles would say you're not supposed to be proud of, you're supposed to be completely humble, I'm a piece of crap and everything else is good, but no, I don't believe in that at all. Now, I believe there is unhealthy pride and there's healthy pride. And so, for one, it's important to take pride in our health and our appearance, not for superficial reasons, but because what it does for us spiritually and emotionally. And also, we're supposed to take notice of when we do good deeds. I tried hard for you guys today. I'm proud of that. You know, and in fact, when we think power thoughts or positive thoughts about self, we're proven to give ourselves greater access to cerebral cortex. Again, that's smart brain. And we can challenge thoughts that don't benefit us and reroute back up to our cerebral cortex with certain types of thinking. That's another discussion. But then I get to having a sense of purpose. And so, again, billions and billions of people on the planet. We don't exactly know why we're on the planet, but there is some freedom, some liberty in that. If I don't know why we're here, I get to say why I'm here. I say why Jeremy's here, and I have a couple of purposes. My purpose is to be the best dad I can be and to be the best social worker that I can be. And so studies show that with a sense of purpose, you have a longer life. You have a better stress response and a happier life. You know, so there's all kinds of outcomes connected to this, but a lot of people never find their purpose. A lot of people never find their purpose. And so I'm here to remind folks that we get to decide that purpose, and then if we pursue that purpose vigorously, don't half-ass it. We can go get it and go hard. Because me pursuing my goals, it has actually helped me through disability, it's helped me through injury. You know, a lot of times I used to think we had to get totally well and then we start shooting for the 4 Ps, but no, sometimes it's the 4 Ps that gets us well. Now, I was at the park one day doing therapy with a young lady. I was there to meet a young lady. We did community-based services, sometimes an outpatient, and beautiful spring day. She got there early. And she was a pretty little thing. She was a University of Oklahoma student, petite, blonde. And she arrived at the park earlier than I. And so when I got there, she was there alone, but there were 2 men in a truck parked near her with the engine running. And as soon as I engaged her, they sped off. And I had some choice parting words for them when I realized what was happening. Of course, I was going to be the hero.
What was happening?
Well, they were scoping her out. She shuddered when I walked up. She said, "That was scary. Those guys were creepers." I said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "Make sure don't come early to the appointments. You know, I don't think we met out there anymore." But I tell you what I did though. I just about gave her advice like a straight white male, because I've been attacked before. I walk my neighborhood. I've lived there 16 years. I got attacked by wild dogs once. I fended myself off, and people asked me, "Jeremy, are you going to quit walking your neighborhood?" That's my familiar route. I'm a blind guy. Hell no, I'm not going to quit walking my route. This is America. Nobody's going to tell me where I can walk, by golly. And so I started to tell her, I was like, "Well, honey, this is America. Don't let somebody..." Then I realized I'm much less likely to be targeted for sexual victimization. Nobody wanted to kidnap me and rape me. So it's really important for me to understand that sometimes power and potential, sometimes people's 4 Ps are not as accessible to them. Some people, I believe everybody should be able to walk down any street in America at any time of day or night, but that's not the reality. And so, but the thing is, there's so many amazing people in the world, and they're doing so many amazing things while injured. What if we were able to thrive? What if we were able to make all TSD PTSD? Because that's one of those things, you know, I told you about different diagnoses. There's too many people walking around with TSD. They've never had a chance for their trauma to be post. And so we're not able to really thrive and develop fully without safety. So last slide. Is there a chair?
Need a chair?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of sleepy. Huh? Yeah. I've been having some back issues. And so at times I got these discs that are pressing in on my spine. They occasionally make me faint. That's not going to happen today. That's not going to happen today. And so, yeah. But on the last slide, one of the things that I want to help people recognize is that, we can redirect the fight. One of the things that I have lots of post-traumatic stress myself, and I have lots of energy. And and I could drive myself crazy with that energy, or I can help as many people as possible. I can lift weights and make my body healthier, and I can get looking good and strong. I can rechannel this energy for something constructive, because there's lots of injured people with lots of hypervigilance just like me. And we can, we can hook up a power cord to this battery and we can do something with it. Or we can let it drive us crazy. We can let it blow our heart out. Because that's what's happening. We can turn this around. So this is the Wilson slide here. Don't just take your word for it. See for yourself. See for yourself. What other people are like. Yeah, see, the thing is, when you get to know somebody else, you expand your knowledge. I wish, don't we all wish we had a neighbor, like Wilson, who could just spout off some wisdom. I heard another Wilsonism the other day. He said, "Be not afraid of growing slowly. Be only afraid of standing still." It was a Chinese proverb. And so go to the last slide, Travis. Yeah, so I got a chair today. It wasn't because of my back. I got a chair because I'm going to stand up. And I'm going to keep standing up. And so I appreciate what you guys do. I appreciate that you guys stand up. And I hope that you'll keep standing up, because the evil forces are at work, but they fear our unity. They fear us being together. And so God bless you guys. Enjoy the rest of the conference. If they're going to have you do an evaluation, I don't know. We would love for you to do one. And if you want it, we'll send you the link for that. It's real quick, 5 questions. But we would love to know how we can keep getting better at this. This is our something. And we thank you for your something. God bless.